Уважаемые товарищи, городской совет народных депутатов.
Set the world.
Pripyat Amusement Park, Chernobyl, Ukraine. Destruction, desolation, and death was what the worst nuclear accident in the history of the world left behind. In the first hours of April 26, 1986, tests were being carried out on the reactor number 4 of the V.I. Lenin Memorial Chernobyl nuclear power station to demonstrate that the plant could continue working even if it had lost all the energy, because the backup generators would be able to restore the energy. But due to a bad design in the reactor and the ignorance and arrogance of the technicians, the reactor overheated, causing it to go off and consequently destroying the roof of the building. This resulted in massive amounts of radioactive waste being scattered in the atmosphere and nearby areas. The disaster was listed as a Category 7 disaster. To give you an idea of how terrible it was, the nuclear explosion from Chernobyl was 100 times more disastrous than the nuclear explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It has been calculated that given plutonium's half-life of 24,100 years, that it will be a very long time before the area is fit for the general population again. It is also worth noting that due to wind patterns at the time of the accident and other environmental factors, not all areas of the 30-kilometer zone are polluted. Some of these areas are considered low risk and often visited by explorers. This is the case of what is probably one of the most famous abandoned amusement parks in the world. Pripyat Amusement Park was planned to be open on May 1st, 1986 for the May Day celebrations, but sadly, because of this disaster, its grand opening never came. This park had 4 attractions: bumper cars, swing boats, swing carousel attractions, and a Ferris wheel. This last one became a symbol of the Chernobyl tragedy as the years passed. For a long time, it was believed that this park was never able to be open to guests, but it was discovered recently that it actually opened after the disaster. As we said before, the park's opening was scheduled for May 1st, but when the disaster happened on April 26th, the government opened the park. That's right. The park was operational during the first 36 hours of the accident. This was because the townspeople of Pripyat were completely oblivious to what had just happened. This was, of course, very wrong and irresponsible, but many theories say that this was because the government wanted to distract residents so they wouldn't know how tragic this accident really had been. When information about the seriousness of the accident came to light, a sudden evacuation of the town was ordered, and the town, and of course the amusement park, were abandoned. Initially, it was decided that the evacuation would last for 3 days, but it was then made permanent later. Radiation levels around the park vary greatly. For the most part, liquidators did an effective job of washing most of the radiation into the soil, so the concreted areas are relatively safe. This park is considered to be somewhat risk-free, but one of the most polluted areas around this park and town is a moss patch near the bumper cars. The atmosphere around the park is terrifying. The place is utterly desolate, and except for the wind and occasionally some birds here and there is almost no sound at all. The rusty, abandoned structures and the simple fact of knowing the large number of people affected by this tragedy makes this park one of the most tragic and sad places in the world.
This video is a compilation with updates from our Abandoned Theme Parks video, because we're releasing part 3 in early May. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It's completely free. And remember, I always quack back.
Western Village. Kenichio Minami is a clear example that the most important thing in life is not to make money, but to make your dreams come true. And that is why Ominami created Western Village in 1970, as a family ranch where guests could go horse riding, lasso practice, go fishing in a fish pond, and many more activities, all in the style of the Old West. Over time, the park started to grow. They acquired more horses, built more attractions, and hired more staff, including performers for live shows. The park was an instant success, bringing 1 million guests per year, but Ominami's ambition was immense, and he wanted more, so he decided to expand the park. So in 1995, he wanted to bring the beautiful landscapes of South Dakota into the park after watching the film Dancing with Wolves. To do this, he decided to create a 1/3 scale replica of Mount Rushmore that cost $27 million. He also added animatronics to the attractions. There was a John Wayne animatronic, a canteen full of robotic cowboys, and a haunted house that included a Grim Reaper dressed as a dentist. A train system and a Mexico-themed land were also added. In 2007, the park grew, but so did its debts, and with the opening of Tokyo Disneyland and Tokyo Disney Sea, fewer and fewer people were visiting the parks, so Western Village declared bankruptcy and had to close. Now the park is completely abandoned. Inside the cantina, the robots remain, rotting away with the pass of time. John Wayne's animatronic is still at the park, but it is practically destroyed. Now, the thought of entering a haunted house attraction is scary itself. Now imagine entering an abandoned one. Inside you can find many creepy mannequins and props and even a creepy lady half buried in stone. The interior of the Mount Rushmore replica is also completely abandoned, dark, and terrifying. On the first floor of the room, there are several teddy bears in various poses and disguises interacting with props. Some of them are in good condition, others not so lucky. Then on the next floor is what used to be called the People's Game Center, but sadly there were no games left, just a lot of dark, empty spaces. And then on the top floor, we can find a diorama of sad-looking Indians, and the best part, looming in the dark, an Abraham Lincoln animatronic statue. Of course, it's now powered, and probably it was switched off the last time mid-speech, because his jaw seems to be forever half open. There is also a small-size model of Mount Rushmore, several flags, maps, and the history of many states. The Mexico area was also left to rot. The train system is completely covered in grass, and the 2 locomotives are rusted. The park that was supposed to be a cowboy town became a ghost town, and there are no plans to restore it. Disney's River Country, Bay Lake, Florida.
River country, big river country, it's a hoop, it's a holler, it's a water jamboree. River country, big river country, if you're hot around the collar, it's a cool place to...
Disney's River Country was the first water park at Walt Disney World. It opened on June 20th, 1976. Positioned on the shore of Bay Lake near Discovery Island, the park featured a rustic wilderness theme, complete with rocks and human-made boulders. It was described as an old-fashioned swimming hole with a twist of Huckleberry Finn. And just as Disneyland had reinvented the amusement park 21 years earlier, River Country reinvented aquatic recreation. The park featured a sandy bottom and unique water filtering system using confluent water from adjacent Bay Lake, which was dammed off, creating a natural-looking artificial lagoon. The park's water was at a higher level than the lake's, which was an effort to prevent lake water from going into the park. The Disney designers created miniature mountains for the water slide, since Florida has no mountains to offer. Bay Cove, the swimming hole, was actually part of Bay Lake and held 330,000 gallons of water. The popularity of River Country convinced Disney executives to build Typhoon Lagoon some years later, to be followed by Blizzard Beach. River Country used to close down seasonally, and at the end of its 2001 season, it closed just as it always did. But when it was time for it to reopen for the 2002 season, the parks didn't. There are many rumors and half-truths about why the park closed down. Some people say that it was because of the death of an 11-year-old boy that contracted a brain-eating amoeba inside the park. But is this true? Yes and no. Did a boy die from a brain-eating amoeba that he caught? Sadly, yes. But that was back in 1980, and not only did the park not close, but it also stayed open for another 21 years. Why didn't the park close? Well, the amoeba can breed in almost any freshwater lake during hot weather, so the park was not technically to blame, and Disney officials said there wasn't much they could do. Some said that River Country had to close when Florida law changed to require water parks to use water from municipal water systems, not from natural bodies of water. But this claim is also false. There were also 2 drownings in the park, but the park didn't close because of these accidents either. The real reason why the park closed down is that attendance levels were too low. Although River Country was the first water park at Walt Disney World, it had been joined by 2 newer, larger ones, Disney's Typhoon Lagoon, which opened in 1989, and Disney's Blizzard Beach in 1995. The new parks offered far more slides, relaxing lazy rivers with clever things to see along the way, fully developed themes, and much greater capacity. On top of that, they offered convenient parking and bus transportation, unlike the awkwardly located River Country. Instead of being demolished, River Country was allowed to deteriorate for many years. The result is a fascinating study of how quickly nature can reclaim a Disney-built attraction. Sections of River Country were visible from boats traveling along Bay Lake. Aerial photos offer an overall view, and some people even snuck into the park. The park was abandoned since 2001, but on March 5, 2018, Disney filed permits for a new mystery development labeled Project 89 to be built along Bay Lake and over the former River Country site. And on May 31st, 2018, it was confirmed that a new resort hotel is going to be built where River Country used to be. Most of the remaining structures at the park, including the remnants of the upstream plunge pool, were demolished on April 20th, 2019 to make way for the development of the new hotel.
Update. The project was going full steam ahead when the 2020 pandemic arrived. Disney removed all references to the project, suggesting that the development had been cancelled. And on March 15th, 2022, Walt Disney World Resort officially announced that the resort was cancelled to make way for new DVC villas at Disney's Polynesian Village Resort, which will be opening late 2024.
Nara Dreamland, Nara, Japan. Judging Nara Dreamland as a cheap knockoff or ripoff of Disneyland is not only incorrect, but very unfair and cruel, since it stains the vision and dreams of creator Kunzio Matsuo. The story of Nara Dreamland is much more complicated than it seems, thanks to the fact that there are several versions that try to explain what happened. One version says that Kunzio Matsuo, creator of Nara Dreamland, cynically copied Disneyland after visiting the park and decided to take it to Japan. This version is 100% false. There are other versions that say that Kunzio Matsuo presented the project to Disney, and Disney was on board. Supposedly, the two planned to bring Disneyland to Nara, and worked hard to build the park. But in the end, the deal fell apart after Disney changed some things they had agreed on about the licensing of the characters. This is also not exactly true. The story is a lot more complicated. In the late 1950s, Kunzio Matsuo, owner and president of the Matsuo Entertainment Company, visited Disneyland on one of his business trips. As soon as he entered Disneyland, he fell in love with the place, and felt inspired to bring a Disneyland to Japan's former capital, Nara. He met with Walt to discuss the idea of bringing Disneyland to Japan. Walt was not interested at first with the idea of opening a Disney park in Japan, so he just told Matsuo that when the time came to do it, the company would help him out. But Walt was really left struck by Matsuo's enthusiasm when he visited again, and brought along engineers to tell him about the project. So he agreed to give Matsuo his know-how associated with managing an amusement park for free, and even sent some of his engineers to the construction site. His intention was never to create a Disneyland in Japan, but help the Japanese themselves build an amusement park that was unique to Japan. Using these resources, the company explicitly designed this theme park and modeled it after Disneyland, under the hopes that Disney would eventually license naming and character rights to them. But that day never came. Apparently, when the park was finished, Matsuo asked for the licensing, thinking that because the park was done, Disney would give it to them. But Disney refused because it was never their plan to give the rights to Matsuo. So, Matsuo Entertainment rebranded its park to Nara Dreamland, and proceeded with plans to open its doors. They released a statement that said that licensing fees were the reason the Disneyland deal was scrapped, while Disney refused to make any official comment. Some people say that Matsuo decided to then pay for Disney's previous help and advice, but no one knows for sure. On July 1st, 1961, Nara Dreamland was open to the public. Because Matsuo Entertainment modeled the park after Disneyland, the two parks had many similarities, like a type of Main Street and the familiar Sleeping Beauty Castle. It also had a Matterhorn-type mountain, with a skyway running through it, as well as an Autopia-type ride and a monorail. The park also had its own mascots, Ran-chan and Dori-chan, two children dressed as bearskin guards. It was divided into 5 areas: Land of the Future, Land of Illusion, Land of Adventure, Land of the Past, and Main Street. Nara Dreamland was really popular when it opened because it was the closest thing to Disneyland in Japan. At its peak, the park had 1.6 million visitors a year, and everything was going great until in 1979, when the Oriental Land Company started talking with the Walt Disney Company to create a Disney theme park in Tokyo. Tokyo Disneyland opened in 1983, and this resulted in a massive reduction of guests for Nara Dreamland, since people were interested in going to an official Disney park. This marked the beginning of the downfall for Dreamland, with attendance numbers dropping to around 1 million visitors a year. Then the Matsuo Entertainment Company, including Nara Dreamland, was bought by the supermarket chain Daiei in 1993. The opening of Tokyo Disneyland would not be the only blow that Nara Dreamland would receive because, in 2001, Tokyo DisneySea opened its doors along with Universal Studios Japan. After those two parks opened, Dreamland's attendance numbers worsened, plummeting to 400,000 visitors a year. In 2004, the park began to decline in quality, some stores closed down, and some attractions started to rust. And on August 31st, 2006, the park sadly closed its doors after 45 years of operation. When the park was closed, the owners didn't bother to clean anything up. They simply left it as it is. After 8 years, the abandoned park became an attraction in its own right. People began trespassing into the property in order to visit it. This resulted in the park being vandalized and props getting stolen and moved around. In 2013, the city auctioned off this site. No applications for acquisition were received. In November 2015, the city put up the property for an auction again. A Japanese newspaper reported that SK Housing, a real estate company, offered $7.3 million. On October 16, 2016, SK Housing began the process of demolishing everything that was on the site. Demolition was completed on December 21, 2017. During the process, 30 rides and 75 buildings, including a multi-story garage, were disposed of. The area is now considered to be a picturesque place. Development of the area is regulated, so only medical facilities, social security institutions, schools, and sports grounds can be built there. Nara Dreamland is a literal representation of how dreams can become nightmares. Land of Oz, North Carolina. In the silent, peaceful wilderness of Beech Mountain in North Carolina, we can find Land of Oz. This park has one of the most tragic stories of abandoned parks. The story of this park goes back to 1965, when brothers Harry and Grover Robbins decided to turn the Beech Mountain Ski Resort into a theme park based on Oz that could be visited year-round. Grover Robbins hired designer Jack Pentis to be able to bring to life his vision of the park. Robbins had a lot of experience and had been successful in creating amusement parks, and a clear example is Tweetsie Railroad that is still in operation. Unfortunately, Land of Oz did not have the same destiny as Tweetsie Railroad, and ended up having a tragic history. The first blow to the park was the unfortunate death of Grover Robbins. This hit the creative team very hard because they were very close. But still, the park opened on June 15, 1970, to all the expected fanfare. Debbie Reynolds cut the ribbon along with her daughter, Carrie Fisher, and thousands of visitors made their way into the park where they could ride in a hot air balloon, go up the mountain, or see a show in the Emerald City. The park allowed guests to experience their own Oz story. They were stuck inside Dorothy's house in the tornado, walked a yellow brick road made up of 44,000 glazed yellow bricks, and even visited the inhabitants of the land. Emerald City consisted of many shops and an amphitheater, which had a show every half hour. The park also had a museum with original movie props, including an original Dorothy dress worn by Judy Garland. With all of this, the park's opening was a success, and it attracted more than 400,000 guests. But then, in 1975, a mysterious fire destroyed Emerald City. The amphitheater and many of the shops were completely gone, along with the park offices, costumes, sound equipment, and props. While the fire was going on, the park's museum was sacked. Many items were stolen, and Dorothy's dress was gone. People say that this was caused by disgruntled employees, but no one knows for sure. After this incident, Land of Oz was taken over by a new administration, but it sadly never recovered and it closed in 1985. The park was abandoned, vandalized, sacked, and left to rot for a while. But thankfully, many parts of the park were saved, like the Yellow Brick Road, many buildings, and most of the costumes. Then in 1990, Emerald Mountain Realty bought the area so they could develop a condo complex. On July 4th, 1991, the park was reopened for the day as part of the town of Beech Mountain's Independence Day celebration and as a kickoff for the redevelopment to the property. And it didn't open again until 1994, when an event called Autumn at Oz was created. This event started as a reunion for the original park's employees, but it became so popular that it was turned into an annual public event. By 2009, over 8,500 people were attending. Each year, the event has been expanded to include all of the characters from The Wizard of Oz. Shows, museum, Emerald City setup, Omaha vendor fair, petting zoo, pony rides, and other activities within the Oz theme, and the money raised during this event goes back into the renovations and upkeep for the park, and of course to add new attractions every year. In 2013, the park added another annual event called Journey with Dorothy. During this event, Dorothy guides guests through the land while recreating the story of how she found the wizard. And while the park remains closed the rest of the year, it is not technically abandoned. The owners have had many problems with urban explorers that think it is. They have reported many cases of robbery and even vandalism, especially during Halloween time. Back in 2013, they had 163 cases of trespassers alone.
They broke into the buildings, they were stealing the bricks. And that's what a lot of people who tell me that break in, well, I saw it was abandoned. And I explain, if you go online and you look us up, you will find our website, our phone number, and our social media accounts to get a hold of us and visit it appropriately.
These annual events keep this park alive and prove that the park found its place somewhere over the rainbow.
Joyland Amusement Park, Kansas. Once upon a time, the town of Wichita, Kansas was home to Joyland Amusement Park, the largest theme park in central Kansas. Founded by Lester Ottaway and his sons, this park was in full operation for 55 years, till it was closed in 2004. For 2 years after that, parts of the park were reopened, but it was closed again in 2006. This time, permanently. Since then, this abandoned theme park has been shrouded in mystery. What is the story behind it? This park was originally founded to house a miniature 12-inch gauge locomotive. Herb, one of Lester's sons, had purchased this train from another abandoned theme park. Herb, who was a race car builder, restored this train. He and his family took the train on tours to county fairs in Kansas and Colorado. After a few years, in 1949, they decided to give it a permanent home. Thus began the journey of the 57-acre Joyland Amusement Park. Till the early 1970s, the park was successfully run by the Ottaway family before they retired and sold it to Stanley and Margaret Nelson. The Nelsons were responsible for introducing many of the most popular rides in the park, such as the Wacky Shack, a 2-story dark ride that featured illusion effects and psychedelic lighting tricks, and the famous wooden roller coaster, among many others. They also replaced the famous miniature train with the first ever C.P. Huntington miniature train built by Chance Rides. The train even carried the serial number 1. However, disaster struck the park in 2004 when a 13-year-old girl fell 30 feet from the Ferris wheel and got seriously injured. This was the first domino that fell, eventually causing the demise of the park. But some would say that the park had already been on its way towards abandonment. Following the Ferris wheel disaster, an investigation was conducted by the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Division, which found several safety issues with the park. When we look back at the operations of the park, we find that there were several other incidents such as this. In the early 1960s, before the era of animal rights activism, the park had featured several animals. This included an 8-month-old lion that bit a caretaker, causing 3 deer to escape in the process. Out of the 3, only 1 deer survived. In 1964, the park was sued because a little girl had smashed her teeth into the steering wheel of a bumper car. The tragedies only increased as the years went by. In 1977, a 7-year-old boy fell to his death from the roller coaster. In the early 1980s, an employee was stabbed to death by 2 people in the park. Towards the end of the same decade, a maintenance worker was crushed by the roller coaster. He had been cutting weeds underneath it and had not heard the ride coming. The 2004 incident, although not as severe as the previous ones, was the beginning of the end for the park. It is clear that the park has a penchant for tragedy, having seen everything from injuries to death to even murder. Perhaps it is better for the citizens that the park remains closed. The aura of tragedy surrounding the park does not even end with its demise. Since 2006, the park has been looted and vandalized several times, and its walls have been covered with graffiti. In 2012, long after the park was abandoned and left to the elements, a maintenance building in the park caught fire. Although no one was hurt, the police suspected arson. In 2015, a windstorm damaged the roller coaster so extensively that it had to be taken apart for safety reasons. By 2018, the Wacky Shack was one of the few rides that had remained intact, and it too was destroyed by fire. With all its rides either damaged or dismantled, the park, which served as a joy for generations of Kansas citizens, now looks like something out of a horror movie. Gulliver's Kingdom, Yamanashi, Japan. Our next abandoned theme park takes us all the way to Kamakushiki in the Yamanashi Prefecture in Japan. Inspired by the novel Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, This theme park has a giant 147-foot statue of Gulliver lying down. The statue is tied down and surrounded by the tiny Lilliputians, making one feel like they have stepped right into Lilliput. The theme park even had a nice view of Mount Fuji. For all intents and purposes, Gulliver's Kingdom sounds like a storybook theme park. Why then was it abandoned? The decision to build this park was an impulsive one taken by the government of Japan in the 90s to boost the economy. But right from the beginning, the park ran into bad luck, leading it to its impending doom. The construction of the park was financed by Niigata Chuo Bank, which collapsed due to non-performing loans. There were also a lot of employment controversies, even during the construction phase. The park was in operation only for 4 years. Even during this time, it barely had any rides. Apart from the giant statue, which was the park's main attraction, the most notable rides were a bobsled track and a luge course, neither of which were for kids. But the main reason for this park's failure was its unfortunate location. The park was built near Aokigahara, the infamous suicide forest of Japan. It is the second most popular suicide spot in the world, and more than 500 people have been said to have taken their lives here in the last 70 years. And if this wasn't enough, the Kamakushiki village was also the location of the headquarters of the Aum Shinrikyo Doomsday Cult. Back in 1995, this cult had been responsible for the sarin gas nerve attacks in the Tokyo subway system, which had resulted in the deaths of 13 people. Their nerve gas production facility was also rumored to be in the same area. The park's proximity to such grim locations put off people from visiting it, leading to its eventual demise. The stunning backdrop of this park only added to its eeriness. With nothing there other than the huge Gulliver statue, which is pinned to the ground by his hair. It looks like a city that was abandoned after a gruesome murder. The park was finally demolished in 2007. Dunblobbin, Crinkley Bottom Theme Park, England. In the 1990s, the BBC ran a popular family entertainment show called Noel's House Party. Created by Noel Edmonds, this program was set in the fictional town of Crinkley Bottom. One of the most popular characters of the show was Mr. Blobby, who was, as the name suggests, a pink blob. He communicated solely by using the word blobby. Mr. Blobby became so popular that it led to a supposed blobby mania. To capitalize on the popularity of the show as well as Mr. Blobby, Noel Edmonds and his production company Unique decided to open theme parks based on the show. In 1994, they opened a Crinkley Bottom theme park in Cricket St. Thomas, Somerset, the first of 3. It was being promoted as Britain's first TV leisure park. The main attraction of the Cricket St. Thomas Park was a huge, pink, blobby-themed house called Dunblobbin. Apart from this, it included other themed areas based on Noddy and the animals of Farthing Wood. The park saw over 500,000 visitors within its first season. A couple even had their wedding there, with Mr. Blobby as their best man. Everything, however, was not rosy. Within a few weeks after the opening, problems began cropping up, from concerns over planning permissions to noise complaints by neighbors to rumors about maltreatment of elephants. The theme park ran into many hurdles. Edmonds wanted to build a replica of the Great House, but the Somerset City Council voted against it. After this incident, during the 30th anniversary of Crinkley Bottom, Edmonds parted ways with the park. Licensing constraints dictated that Mr. Blobby and all the other attractions should remain on site. The park was rebranded as Cricket St. Thomas Wildlife Park once more. Just 2 years later, however, the owners decided that they did not want to be associated with the controversial era of Crinkley Bottom. They closed down Mr. Blobby's house and attempted to destroy all traces of evidence of the pink blob from the park. This might seem like the end of Mr. Blobby at Cricket St. Thomas, but in the early 2000s, a few urban explorers stumbled upon Blobby's house. This started an influx of people wanting to take pictures with the infamous Pink Blob's house. Instances of vandalism and illegal raves being conducted there were reported. Ultimately, the owners demolished the house, except for the pink polystyrene toilet, which was placed in an art gallery. The second Blobby theme park opened in Morecambe in 1994 on the condition that the nearby Bear Lane railway station be promoted as Bear Crinkley Bottom. Things started going downhill soon after the park opened its gates. Citizens started complaining about the lack of facilities and against the liquor license granted to the park on the grounds that it would encourage hooligan behavior. The Labor-led council sued Edmonds on the grounds of misrepresentation and negligence because the park wasn't attracting enough visitors. Neither was it generating enough income. Support was withdrawn, and the park had to close down only after 13 weeks of being open. This whole fiasco was termed Blobbygate and cost taxpayers £2 million. This park had the shortest lifespan of the three. The third and final Crinkley Bottom attraction was licensed to Pleasurewood Hills, a theme park, in 1996 in Lowestoft, Suffolk. During this time, the park turned its theater into a castle. But this ended just a year later when the ownership of the park changed hands. It would seem that no matter how many times Edmonds tried, the park was doomed to be a disaster. But for a brief period of time, it served as a pink slice of heaven for fans of Blobby. Yongma Land Theme Park. In Yongmasan in the Jungnang district in Seoul, South Korea, there lies a dilapidated amusement park called Yongma Land. Opened in 1980 as a humble, family-friendly amusement park, it had a good run for the first decade of its life. Then Lotte World opened, and people quickly lost interest in this theme park next door. With not enough visitors left to sustain the park, they closed the doors officially in 2011. But is the theme park really closed? Well, it is, for the most part, and no, we don't mean that it's haunted, although there have been many rumors. Instead of leaving the park to decay, the owners had the brilliant idea of opening its doors to people for 5,000 won a day, which is $5. The abandoned rides and their fading colors have become hotspots for photography, cosplay events, and even filming music videos. Crayon Pop's Bar 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 video was inspired by this derelict park. If you want a true horror movie experience, you can request for the lights in the merry-go-round to be turned on at night for 30,000 won. Apart from the ghostly merry-go-round with its horses, the park has bumper car rides, an octopus ride, a Viking ship, and a displaced clown motif roller coaster, among other rides. The rusted rides with their paint chipped away give a very vintage feel to the park, but their friendly faces invite you to take part in their decay. Taman Festival, Bali. The previous theme park might not have been haunted, but this one certainly seems to be. Our next theme park, Taman Festival, located in Bali, is known as the saddest theme park on the island. Not only was it a failed amusement park, but it was also a failed dream. Costing a whopping $100 million to build, the park now lies abandoned with crumbling buildings, rogue vines covering every surface, and piles of grass littering the ground. This once magnificent theme park is being swallowed by nature and looks like a haunted, dilapidated building straight out of a thriller movie. Stories of ghosts haunting this place are often told whenever this park is mentioned. In fact, the gatekeeper of the park was once recorded as saying that he sees ghosts every day. Just thinking about this park is enough to send chills down anybody's spine. With it being abandoned even before its gates were ever open to the public, this park is shrouded in mystery. More than 2 decades ago, the Indonesian government, along with a wealthy investor, began building this park in the hopes that it would turn the heavily trafficked beachside city of Sanur into a tourist hotspot. This park was supposed to steal everyone's breath away with its magnificence. It was supposed to feature the world's first entirely inverted roller coaster, Bali's biggest swimming pool, a fake volcano, a pit full of crocodiles, a 3D cinema, and a laser show, which was going to be the main attraction. The laser machines were meant to illuminate the night sky with a myriad of colors. This park would undoubtedly have changed the face of tourism in Bali. So then, why did it never open its doors to the public? There are various reasons for this, including a legend or two. Just a few months before the park was set to open, the Thai national currency tanked. Some say the park was open for 6 months before closing down, while others say that it was never opened at all. The Asian recession made the park go bankrupt, and they could not find anyone to purchase the park. Another reason cited is that there were disputes over land ownership. Legend also says that the park was struck by lightning, which damaged the laser machines. The cost for its reparations was so high that insurance companies refused to cover it. The owners had no choice but to abandon this park, leaving the land free for spirits and ghosts to make a home. Locals have dubbed this place a ghost town and steer clear of it. It is said that the crocodiles were never transported out of the park and were left to roam around freely inside. Apparently, they have taken a liking to human meat. There are even stories about visitors who went inside and never returned. A group of men stand near the gates of the park and ask you to pay 10,000 rupiah, which is the equivalent to $1, to enter. The buildings are covered with graffiti, and bats and mosquitoes and various other bugs have taken over the place. There is film tape strewn all over the theater building, and the roofs look ready to collapse. The park has truly been reclaimed by Mother Nature. But none of this has stopped photographers, graffiti artists, and travelers with a penchant for exploring off the beaten path from coming and visiting. If you don't mind a little bit of the supernatural and spotting an occasional killer crocodile or two, this 8-hectare theme park is definitely worth a visit. Six Flags New Orleans.
Spend the day at Jazzland Theme Park where the fun is at full blast. I gotta do that again! Jazzland in New Orleans on I-10 at the I-510 exit is filled with thrills for the whole family. Serious rides. 30 incredible rides and spectacular entertainment.
This is great.
Come for the thrills, stay for the fun at Jazzland. Open daily at 10 a.m.
Get your fill of thrills and jazz.
Originally known as Jazzland, the Six Flags in New Orleans has stood abandoned for more than 15 years. This 147-acre park first opened in 2000. It was operated for 2 years under the name Jazzland by Alpha Smart Parks, but it was owned by a Spanish company called Parques Reunidos. In 2002, Six Flags purchased the lease for the park and rebranded it as the New Orleans branch of Six Flags. The park featured a myriad of rides, including an inverted roller coaster named Batman the Ride, which was relocated from a defunct park in Japan called the Thrill Valley. A Vekoma multiple looping roller coaster called the Jester, which had been sourced from the Texas branch of Six Flags, among many others. But the signature ride of the park was the Mega Zeph, yet another roller coaster. However, this roller coaster was unique in that it had a wooden roller coaster track built on a steel frame. This was done to prevent termite infestation as well as help the ride withstand strong hurricane winds. The construction of this roller coaster provides a strange sense of foreboding, as not even 5 years after its opening, the park was demolished by Hurricane Katrina and had to close its doors. The park was thoroughly submerged, and in the aftermath of the hurricane, what was left was a wasteland. The park was left standing in nearly 7 feet of water, and all of its rides had suffered extensive wind and water damage. One of the only rides that was lucky enough to escape without too much damage due to its elevated platform and corrosion-resistant structure was the Batman ride. This ride was refurbished and relocated to the Six Flags in San Antonio, where it was unveiled as the Goliath. Unfortunately for the Megazeph, even the hurricane-resistant structure could not protect it from the damage due to long-term submersion in salt water. The park was declared to be a total effective loss, and Six Flags began talks with the New Orleans government to get out of its 75-year lease. In 2009, the lease with Six Flags was finally terminated because of their bankruptcy proceedings. It is currently under the ownership of the Industrial Development Board of New Orleans. With almost all of its equipment damaged and broken, a very spooky aura surrounds this park. Urban explorers, photographers, thrill seekers, and even just curious citizens often hop the fence to take a look around. It is also a popular location to shoot films. Be warned, however, that entering the park is illegal and may be considered trespassing. There have been many attempts to revamp the park over the years, but none of the ideas were implemented. In 2009, Nickelodeon suggested turning it into a Nickelodeon-themed park. In 2011, there were plans to construct a shopping center called Jazzland Outlet Mall. There were even talks of reopening this park under its original name, Jazzland. Finally, the decision was turned over to the mayor. As of May 2021, 2 proposals have been finalized for its redevelopment. One was Bayou Phoenix, which plans to build a water park, a hotel, sports complex, and travel center. Another was Kiernan West and Shield 1, which plans to build an urban farm, education center, and transportation hubs. No matter who wins, one thing is very clear. The park will no longer exist as we know it.
Update. In October 2021, New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell announced Bayou Phoenix as the partner chosen to redevelop the site. And on August 15th, 2023, the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority approved the Bayou Phoenix development proposal to move to the next phase. They will invest $500 million to build a complex with sports fields, water parks, hotels, restaurants, and shops. Did you enjoy the video? Consider subscribing, and even better, becoming a member or Patreon. You have no idea how much that helps us create more videos. Plus, you'll get access to posts and soon exclusive Q&A shorts with me. Links in the description and pinned comment. Thank you so much for watching the video.